Welcome back. Thank you for staying with us. Now, it is not news that the U.S. has quietly made a deal with Uganda to take some people who are being deported under a new third country policy, meaning that some migrants who are denied asylum in the U.S. could be sent to countries they've never lived in. Now, Uganda says that it will only accept people without criminal records and not unaccompanied children, and that it prefers people of African origin, but the rules and numbers are still unclear. Rwanda has already taken some deportees and promised housing and support, which shows that this is already happening in practice. People are upset because the agreement was made with little transparency and could put vulnerable people at risk. Now, this evening, I'm joined by Jide Olatuyi. He's an executive director of Policy Consult in Abuja. Thank you so much for joining us, Jide, on the conversation.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me.
All right, now let's have your thoughts on the whole third country policy, from U.S. to African countries. Can you tell us what exact criteria the U.S. and Uganda are using? Who is eligible, who is not?
Yeah, so that's one of the concerns of having here. When we hear about that 7 people have already arrived from the U.S., 7 refugees asylum seekers have already arrived in Rwanda out of about 250. So the first major questions that were asked is whether those people that were returned for asylum purposes from the U.S. to Rwanda, whether they underwent the due process as prescribed by the 1951 Refugee Convention and, of course, the 1967 Protocol, by the international norm that is framework that is governing the addressing of refugees, asylum seekers globally. So that was a major one question that was raised, whether it was a done deal that was done between the American government and the Rwandan authorities. That's one. Then 2, in what way? And what were the pacts, what were the agreements, what were the bilateral agreements that both countries entered into? What were the conditions? Were the rights of those asylum seekers or the refugees, were they going to be, protected? Were they going to be guaranteed? Was freedom part of it? Was long-term sustainability of integration, was it part of the agreement? Or it was just the U.S., externalizing its migration and asylum policy, to third world countries? That's the major, questions that is meant for us, because it's not enough for the U.S. to say, okay, we are bringing in African migrants or migrants of African descent to African countries, but then what are the conditions that are aligned with or that are associated with these transfers? Now, we all know the rights level, as far as Rwanda is concerned. Rwanda is already groaning under, a lot of rights-related, violation issues. So if Rwandans are experiencing a lot of rights violation, rights abuses issues, oppositions are, mounting about how they are being politically repressed, in their own country. So how will migrants or refugees or asylum seekers, be protected in this country that has human rights, abuse record?
All right. Now, you already did say that Rwanda took 7 people and says that it will take up to 250. But are there really protections, for these people, when they arrive? Because we've also heard that small groups were sent to South Sudan and Eswatini as well. Why were those deals kept so quiet? And who in those countries actually signed off?
Yeah, so that is part of the ongoing debate, and it's already mounting raising tensions, among rights groups and also migrants, migration experts all around the world. This does not signpost good precedent for us. Because, yeah, two countries can on their own make a decision to sign bilateral agreements. But as far as those bilateral agreements do not in any way undermine, international norms. I just mentioned the 1951 Refugee Convention. So if the freedom and the rights of migrants are not fully protected in this bilateral agreement, I mean, it's null and void because it's already undermined, and makes of the global convention that governs the protection regimes for, asylum seekers and refugees. The conventions and the protocols, specifically mention about rights. It's specifically mentioned about freedom. It's also specifically mentioned about integration. So, and integration is not, integration of the asylum seekers is not just about providing habitat, providing food. It's about education, it's about health, it's about, bringing opportunities, access to employment, equity. So are these part of the deals that the US and the Rwandan government signed? We don't know yet. We doubt if that is the case.
All right. Now, I'm being told that Dr. Nicola Palmer, Senior Lecturer of Public Law, University of Cape Town, has actually joined us right now. Dr. Palmer, can you hear me? Hello, Dr. Palmer, can you hear me?
I can.
All right, thank you so much for joining us. Now, let's hear your thoughts on the treaty that's a truce between Uganda and the U.S., especially considering the fact that Uganda's parliament was not involved publicly. Shouldn't an agreement like this face parliamentary scrutiny or even legal review in Kampala?
Definitely. I think all of these deals need to be getting both parliamentary and legal review. And it's really crucial that we recognize that first and foremost, this is an American policy, and it forms part of the Trump administration's current moves towards using migration deals as part of their trade negotiations and their trade negotiation tactics. And so part of that legal review and part of the legal problem lies with the United States. And I think there's a danger of turning attention immediately to Uganda, to Rwanda, to South Sudan, to Eswatini, where actually the first point of critique needs to be in the US, and it needs to be focused on the fact that there haven't been sufficient legal processes for these people who are being deported. And that is the first area where there needs to be legal organizing and resistance to these deals.
All right, still on you, Dr. Palmer. Now, human rights groups in Uganda have actually said that the whole scheme stinks. Now, do you have an idea of specific risks, that they are worried about, especially for those who are being sent to, the third world countries?
So the first risk is a major issue around inequality, because these are wealthy, first world, developed countries that are burden shifting. They are moving their own obligations to offer refuge to individuals, and those are obligations that all states have, not only states that are signatories to the Refugee Convention of 1951, but also states that have general obligations under customary international law. And these are obligations that states like the US and the UK, of course, we know the UK had an earlier deal with Rwanda that the UK Supreme Court found to be unlawful. So the first obligation is on the US and the UK to be offering refuge and to be offering effective refuge that doesn't involve deporting individuals to any other country, let alone countries that don't have the same economic and global political power.
All right, now, we know that, still talking about the fact that, right groups have said that the whole thing stinks. Jide, officials in Rwanda have actually promised housing, healthcare, and also training. Who exactly, do we know who is paying for all of that, and for how long will this last?
Now, the big states in the West using the inequality or unequal balance of power to relate, to partner with third countries, weak countries, is evidence, in this particular, policy of, whether you call it deporting, removing, or extraditing migrants from African countries. So if Africans are, source countries for migration, you are now turning the, narrative, just like what was said just now, what Trump is doing, making Africa not only a source of, origin countries, but also, destination countries. And in terms of whether they have the weaker, younger, smaller countries, whether they do have the financial strength to be able to, cater for this new incoming refugees and asylum seekers, the answer is definitely no. It's just that, well, as far as these two countries, maybe Rwanda and Uganda, coming up to say, okay, they also want to be seen, they want some visibility, they want to portray power. But the real fact is that the American system is using its dominance power to lord it over these small countries, over some stipends of, development aids. Of course, we all know Rwanda is growing towards, it's already, developing. But whether it has the infrastructure that can sustainably, retain the integration programs for this, removed migrants from the U.S. is another case, entirely. So it makes, even the existing refugee population that Rwanda has is already a burden on it. Talk less of whether, that removal that is done from the U.S. to Rwanda, whether it's going to, lead or give genuine pathways to integration. All of this remains seriously in legal limbo.
Okay. Now, beyond Rwanda's figure, do we know how many people, are being sent to other places like Eswatini, and on what timetable? Just briefly, please.
So I think there's been general uncertainty over both the financial figures in response to your earlier question. So it took many months for the figure in relation to the UK and Rwanda deal, which came out as £270 million. It took months for that to come out, and it only came out through the legal proceedings before the High Court, the Court of Appeal, and then ultimately the Supreme Court in the UK. So the numbers of migrants are equally opaque. The question for how many people, and the real concern is that rather than just focusing on individual deportations, we're now looking at the deportation of groups. So of course we see 250 people arriving in Kigali, but the implication is that there are going to be increasing numbers. And of course, the number of deportations to Rwanda at the moment has only been 7, but the idea is that we would see larger numbers than that.
Okay.
But what is key is that none of this has been openly communicated. All of this is being done as background deals, and that raises the need for increasing interrogation of this, both through the courts and, crucially, through Parliament.
All right. Now, still, let's stay with you, Palmer. Some deportees actually did tell reporters that they wanted to go back home. So, for example, if someone refuses to stay, what safe return options or even travel documents are available, if there's any?
So it's going to be different in different countries. And the country case study that I have the deepest knowledge of is the Rwandan case. And here we do see that Rwanda has a good track record of offering refuge. It has over 130,000 individuals who are currently refugees in the country, the majority of whom are coming from the Democratic Republic of Congo and Burundi. But the provision to individual refugees who, say, for example, are coming from El Salvador, is much more complex, because this is not the system that is well established in Rwanda, and so the capacity, I don't doubt the capacity of the Rwandan administrative state to provide them with passports and papers, but the wider point is that this is something that should be ultimately dealt with in the US and should never be coming to Rwandan soil in the first place.
All right. Now, I'm very sure the reason why they complained about wanting to go back home is because there's been reports of harsh conditions like solitary confinement in Eswatini, allegations about who was labeled a violent offender in South Sudan. So, Jide, back to you. What due process checks should happen before people like these are transferred?
I think basically before being transferred or before being removed legally from any country is to, find a way to do a correct profiling. Monitor according to what the 1957 Refugee Convention with its 1967 protocol talked about. You need to have been very sure that these migrants that are going to be removed, you have a very definite plan, that will probably give them a very sustainable kind of living in the new country where you're taking them to. If you cannot, host or approve their asylum or application, then the third country that you are taking them to, there must be evidence of good plannings, freedom, rights, sustainable integration, for them for where they're going. And we're not talking about, short-term, mid-term kind of thing. We're talking about a long-term kind of rights protection, freedom, opportunity to access education, equality, and means of employment, means of livelihood. These are strong, factors that indicate that, yes, there are maybe where, yes, U.S. cannot take more refugees or asylum seekers. Then in the third countries, you have to be able to have enough documentations to prove that in the next 5, 10, 15 years, these asylum seekers or refugees have a pathway to, sustainable reintegration programs.
All right. Now, while we are about to round up, let's hear your final thoughts, Dr. Palmer, especially, regarding the fact that people actually want to know what exactly does Uganda get in return for this deal? Is it aid, trade, perks, or even political favors? Because they feel like, these arrangements should be made public, even though the White House did frame this as a deterrent. But is there any evidence that these third country removals would actually reduce irregular migration, or do they just move the problem elsewhere?
It's very clear that these deals do not deter. This is not the reason why people flee in the first place, and we know generally that the increasingly tough borders, the outcome is actually only leaving people in more marginalized places and risking their lives. And I think we do need to think about who is benefiting and who is carrying the costs of these deals. And the people who are carrying the costs are the most vulnerable migrants who themselves may no longer be able to live in the place where they find themselves due to threats of persecution, due to conflict, and the people who are benefiting the most are the Trump administration, as it can do these public displays of cruelty. And of course, we see the Ugandan, the South Sudan, and the Rwandan and the Eswatini governments seeing an opportunity to try to leverage power with the United States. And that involves backdoor deals. So I don't think it's a coincidence that you've seen an acceleration in these deals at the same time as they are negotiating a peace deal between Rwanda and the Democratic Republic of Congo that is deeply tied into economic integration and particularly access to critical minerals. And so Trump is directly tying his trade negotiations and his push to try to access increasing critical minerals in the East African and the Central African region to this move to show mass deportation as another aspect and as another domestic policy that he's pursuing. And we really need to start engaging with the reality that we're talking about trading in people as well as trading in minerals. And that's why we need to have as much opposition as possible to these programs.
All right. Well, thank you so much, gentleman and lady, for your time and for speaking on this. Dr. Nicola Palmer, Senior Lecturer, Public Law, University of Cape Town, and also Jide Olatuyi, Executive Director, Policy Consult. We appreciate you once again.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks very much.
It's a pleasure. And that's all for today on The Conversation. Thank you so much for staying tuned, and do not forget to catch up on our missed episodes on YouTube channel. That's at News Central TV. You can also watch News Central live on DSTV channel 422, GoTV channel 23, Star Times channel 274, Avo TV, and YouTube. Until next time, I remain Darshan Usman.